Boy X. We are at, sorry, phone's plugged in and the cord keeps pulling on it here. We are on page 196. There are 5 hours until shutdown, and Ash and Isabel had decided that they are going to split up. Isabel's going to go for the boat, and Ash is going to go to try and get the cure from Pierce. In the shadow of a large tree, Ash sharpened the tip of a long branch to make a primitive spear. Isabel took a chunk of Hex 13 from Thorn's pack and molded around the end of the spear. She put one of the small silver detonators into the putty and switched on the handset. I still think we're stronger together. Rainwater dripped from her lips. I know. Ash could see the fear in her eyes, smelled burned plastic in the air around him. I hope you're right about this. She nodded at the lump of Hex 13 on the end of his spear. Ash wiped away the beads of rain that clung to his eyelashes. Just remember, Channel 72, tighten down. He had to believe that if Thorn had been honest about the syringe in his pack, then he was being honest about everything else. Isabel looked at Ash as if she were about to say something, but then just turned her eyes to the device and bit her bottom lip. Excuse me. She held her handset close to the detonator and pressed the button. A pinprick of green light appeared at the tip of the detonator, and the screen illuminated Isabel's face as she selected the smoke option and touched the confirm button. She cleared her throat and swept the wet hair out of her face. It's ready. Okay. Ash's stomach lurched. It'll be thick, hard to breathe. You need to put something over here. She held a hand over her mouth and nose. Ash glanced around and then drew his knife and cut a strip from the hem of his shirt. He held it away. Sorry, my dog's trying to climb on my lap here. He held it away from the corner of the tree, soaking it in the weakening downpour. This will have to do. He wrung it out and tied it around his neck like a scarf. Oh, and you can see I did tie-dye this weekend with my daughter. My fingers are all green. That's why they look gross like that. They're stained. Sorry. Isabel stood and took Thorn's survival pack when Ash offered it to her. She fastened it so it was hanging by her hip. I'll set it off in 5 minutes. She pointed at the small lump of Hex 13 on the end of the spear. Good luck. She came forward and gave Ash a hug. She wrapped her arms right around him and held him for a moment before breaking away. 5 minutes. She glanced at her watch, then turned and disappeared into the night. Watching her go made Ash feel empty inside. They had been a good team. Together, they had managed to make it this far, but alone, things could be very different. He hoped he had made a mistake. Lying in the undergrowth, he began to count. It was the only way he had to keep track of time. He listened to the beats of his own heart, thinking each one of them to be 1 second from another, and told himself he was Ash McCarthy. He was strong. He could do this. It's going to fail. You'll never do it. He tightened his jaw and banished the voice to the darkest part of his mind. He concentrated on counting, on what lay just a few feet through the trees. 3 minutes left. Scooping up more dirt from the ground, he reapplied his camouflage just to be sure, then drew his knife from its sheath and hefted it in his left hand. The spear was in his right. 2 minutes. He glanced up at the howlers sitting in the branches. They were more tense now, as if waiting for something to happen. Even during the downpour, they had made no attempt to seek shelter, but remained at their posts. Fur flattened against their bodies, so the muscles rippled in their shoulders. Not one of them followed Isabel. Ash took one last look at them and crept forward, following the smell of the fire, inching closer to the camp. 1 minute. There it was, the fire, orange light flickering through the trees. He pulled the damp cloth over his mouth and looked at the Hex 13 stuck to the tip of his spear, like an oversized lump of chewing gum. The tiny green light was barely visible from just an inch away, but when Ash looked at it, the light clicked red, and he knew that somewhere in the forest, Isabel had triggered the handset. There was a hiss like a match being struck. The end of the makeshift spear was engulfed in a thick, white, blossoming smoke. Now! Ash leaped to his feet in a single powerful movement. He sprang forward like an animal, his footsteps light, his muscles strong as he sprinted through the undergrowth. He ducked overhanging branches and leaped over protruding roots. He flowed through the trees as if this were his natural home. Above, the monkeys began to howl. The swirling, pulsating, all-powerful sound rippled across the forest, a continuous wave of growling, whooping, and grunting from at least 50 monkeys that was now answered first by the one imprisoned in the crate in the clearing, then by others deeper in the forest. The agitated howlers jumped from tree to tree, rattling the branches, showering leaves and bugs and fruit onto the forest floor. It was an aggressive display, but Ash felt no threat from them as he hurtled on toward the spot where he and Isabel had hidden to watch the camp. As he reached it, he spotted Cain getting to her feet, shocked by the sudden eruption in the treetops. The other soldiers were doing the same, raising their weapons, pointing them into the forest. Ash didn't waste a second. He drew back his right arm and launched the spear as hard and high as he could. At school, he had never managed to throw a javelin more than several feet, but this one sailed up like a rocket, leaving a trail of dense white smoke. It passed between the trees as it rose higher than Ash could have hoped, and when it reached its highest point, it slowed, then tipped, and began its descent. It couldn't have been a more perfect shot. The spear landed smack dab in the middle of the camp, spewing smoke, smothering everything in a thick blanket that curled out into the surrounding vegetation like prehistoric mist. Immediately, the soldiers were engulfed in it, and Cain began issuing instructions as it invaded their lungs, making them cough. Dark shapes stumbled about in the clouds, some of them heading toward the spot where Ash had been, but he was already moving. As soon as the spear began its descent, he shifted the knife into his other hand and broke to the right, circling the camp, racing toward the spot where Pierce was sitting. The howlers formed a seething circle in the canopy around the clearing. They clung to the branches, shaking them, creating a storm of sound that merged with their fierce growls and whoops. They tore nuts and fruits from the trees and flung them down in a hail that disappeared into the smoke. Gonna stop there and post it.